I grew up Baptist. I know, I take your condolences, but it's a joke, kind of. But I grew up Baptist. We weren't even allowed to clap at the church I grew up in. You just had to, in your heart, just be thankful and happy. But when those same people would go to sporting events or watch the Super Bowl or something like that, and a touchdown would happen, they would raise their hands and they would shout. And it didn't make much sense to me, because what Jesus has done for us is way more exciting than a football game or than a touchdown. And I know not everybody's emotionally expressive, and that's okay. But I was like, hey, these people that are jumping up and down over a game, I feel like should be jumping up and down over the grave being empty and Jesus being alive. But so I had all that was repressed in me. So I got to get it out now. So that's why I'm sweating before I even got up here. Whew. Man. If you really get a glimpse of who Jesus is, and Jesus has really done something for you, I mean, that's when you can really worship. That's when you can really get excited about the things. And you might not even sing good, and that's okay. You can still get excited about what he's done and how he's buried your past, and fountain of grace is running your way. Man. Woo! Okay. My name's Matt. Those of you who don't know, I'm part of the teaching team here. So excited that you are here. We have been going through the book of Nehemiah. Last couple of weeks, we've covered the first 3 chapters of Nehemiah, and we're looking at being on mission together. That's what this series is about. And our mission is to look up and love God, look in and be transformed, look out and serve others. You hear us say that every week. That's what our mission is here, and that's the mission that God has called us to, and that's what it looks like in our particular environment. And we carry out that mission so that someday our vision will be realized. And Rachel mentioned our vision a minute ago after she stole my joke. She's in here now. She wasn't at the 9 o'clock, so I decided to dog her because she wasn't in here. But she stole my joke about being mourning for the Lions and TikTok. But I forgave her. I still love her. But it was a good joke. Anyway, but we carry out that mission so that someday we will realize the vision, which is to transform downriver by following Jesus together. And this week, I want to talk about resistance. It's something that we face daily, both literally and figuratively. And I want to talk about facing resistance to the mission that God has given us. Resistance is that thing that slows down runners and cyclists, makes them work harder for what they're trying to do. It uses up more of an airplane's fuel and causes it to have to work harder. And it's that thing that makes you sometimes not want to get out of bed in the morning. It's both literal and figurative. And if you're taking notes, which would be in the bulletin that you got when you came in, you can take notes that way if you'd like. But you will face resistance to the mission. If you want to write that down, you might want to do that. Because it's important to remember, you will face resistance to the mission. John 16:33, Jesus said, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world, you may from time to time experience tribulation. Is that what it says? You will have tribulation, resistance, opposition. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus understood resistance because he faced it, even to the point where he was killed, which we'll talk about towards the end of the message. When we pick up in Nehemiah, chapter 4 is where we'll be today. We're going to back up a little bit, but the book of Nehemiah, just a quick recap. Nehemiah was cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. He comes from a line of Jews. It's been about 150 years since the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar. I don't exactly know how long that takes to sign that, but King Nebuchadnezzar. So he destroys the city over 150 years ago, and there's been multiple people tried to rebuild it, and no one's done it. And then Nehemiah gets word from other people that they've tried again, it didn't work, the walls are still not restored. He goes to the king, asks for permission to go and start on this quest to rebuild the walls in Jerusalem and bring back all the Jews that have been scattered all across the world and bring them back into Jerusalem, because they are supposed to fulfill the mission of God, which was to be God's representatives to the world and to share with them who the one true God was, Yahweh God. And in order to do that, they need to all come back to Jerusalem, because that's what God had told them to do. And so he gets permission to take the king's supplies and take some people and go and rebuild these walls. And he faces opposition from the moment he arrives, from the moment it's even told that he's going to come back to Jerusalem. In fact, it says in Nehemiah 2, verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard that he was coming back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Why are they resistant to this? Because someone is seeking the welfare of the people of Israel. Sanballat and Tobiah don't want anyone to seek the welfare of the people of Israel because they're racists. They're anti-Semites, which means they hate the Jews. They're prejudiced against the Jews. They don't like Jews. In fact, Sanballat was a Samaritan, and we don't have time to go into all of that, but the Samaritans and Jews hated each other for a long, long, long time. Jesus actually bridges that when he comes, but we don't have time to go into that. But they don't like Jews. And they're mad that someone has come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. And it makes me wonder if some people in this room get displeased when somebody seeks the welfare of particular people groups that you don't like. Has someone ever sought the welfare of a particular people group you didn't like and you were greatly displeased? I'll keep going, don't worry. You won't have to be too uncomfortable for too long. See, Sanballat and Tobiah know why Nehemiah is there. He's another Jew trying to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and bring the people back into the city. And there is immediate opposition to Nehemiah's mission. And as soon as you and I become part of the mission of God, we will face opposition. Right away, we get resistance to it. And that resistance comes from a lot of different people and in a lot of different ways. But it's really important to remember who the battle is against. This is a verse I have to be reminded of many times. I would encourage you to memorize it, circle it, underline it, whatever you need to do to get this verse down. But it is so crucial to our spiritual battles that we face. Ephesians 6:12, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. The battle is not against flesh and blood. In other words, it's not against humans. The battle is against the evil one, against Satan and his forces. These things that list, rulers, authorities, cosmic powers, spiritual forces, these are behind the scenes things. These are not the flesh and blood humans. The opposition, the resistance comes from flesh and blood humans, but the ultimate source is Satan. And our battle is not against those people that bring resistance or opposition. Our battle is against the one that is using them to bring the opposition and the resistance. Nehemiah's battle wasn't really against Sanballat and Tobiah or the others. It's really against the racism and the anti-Semitism that has been perpetrated onto them and that they have accepted through the source of the evil one, who is Satan. We need to realize that the battle is not against another church. It's not against someone who criticizes you or ridicules you. It's against Satan. It's not against the person who annoys you. It's not against the person who drives you insane. It's not against the person that you just would really prefer not to see today. And I know for a lot of you, that's your spouse. But that's not where the battle is. The battle is against Satan. And at some point, we have to face the fact. I want you to hear this. At some point, we have to face the fact that we have most likely been unwillingly or unknowingly used to oppose the mission of God at some point. It's very likely that Satan has used you to oppose God's mission, and you didn't even know it. You didn't even realize it. I want to look at some of the forms that this resistance took with Nehemiah and see how that relates to our day today and our mission. So let's look at Nehemiah 4, 1 through 3. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, remember Nehemiah is the one writing the book. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. He mocked them, he ridiculed them, he made fun of them. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burn ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Yeah, what he said, basically. Yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall." Resistance often comes in the form of judgment. You can write that down if you're taking notes. Resistance as judgment. They were judging these Jews, and they were judging them in multiple ways. They were judging their physical strength. They said they're feeble. Feeble Jews, they called them. Are they going to be able to do this themselves? They judged them spiritually. They said, what are they going to do? Just do some sacrifices like the Jews do, and the walls are just going to appear? They insulted and mocked and ridiculed and judged their intelligence. They said they're too dumb to know this won't work. And they judged their craftsmanship. They said if a fox climbs on these walls, it's all just going to fall down. In our mission, as we carry out the mission of God, we're going to face judgment. And you know something I have found, and this might not be true of you, but what I have found is that most of the judgment that I face in my life comes from me. I'm the one judging myself. Well, I'm too dumb to know this won't work. What do I think God's going to take? God doesn't care about me. It's like he's going to handle this for me. He doesn't care about me. We face judgment from a lot of people, and I know that can hurt, but the worst judgment is the judgment we put on ourselves. And I want you to see the first thing Nehemiah does when he faces resistance. Verse 4, he says, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised." Have you ever been despised? Anybody ever despised you? Maybe you even despise yourself. Take it to God. First thing Nehemiah does, take God, we are being despised. These people hate us. Here's what Jesus said about this in Matthew 5. He said, "Blessed." And that word blessed literally means happy. Happy are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Why? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. If people are judging you because of the mission, because you're carrying out, if people despise you because you're doing what God has called you to do, what God has called us as a people to do, that's okay. You should feel blessed. I know it doesn't feel very blessed. It doesn't feel like a blessing. Nobody goes home and says, "Oh, somebody made fun of me, and I just feel so blessed." But Jesus said you are blessed. You might not feel blessed, but you are blessed. And when you don't feel blessed, you have to remember the reality that Jesus said you are blessed, even if you're not feeling it. All right, don't have time to stop there. There's so much in Nehemiah 4. This could have been a 2-hour sermon. You're welcome. It's not, okay? I had to cut so much from this. Anyway, Nehemiah continues in his prayer, and here's what he says. "Do not cover their guilt. Let not their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." Don't forgive them. Don't forgive their sin. He wants God to destroy them. His prayers sound a lot like the prayers of David in the Psalms. If you read the Psalms, David will say, we crushed this person and, kill their family and everybody who's ever known them and all their friends and their animals too. And, I don't think that part's in there, but he wants all these people to be killed and to be, strike them with illness and all this stuff. This isn't an example of the type of prayer you should pray and that you should be praying these things for your enemies. But this is an example of the type of prayer you should pray in that it is honest. If you're taking notes, write down that honest prayers are holy prayers. Now, when I say holy, we don't mean perfect. It's not what the word holy means. The word holy means set apart, means other than, means different than. We don't have time to go into the book of Job, but in the book of Job, he says a bunch of things about God, and at the very end, God says, he has spoken right about me, and that word right means he has spoken honestly about me. God loves honest prayers. You can be honest with God in your prayers. God, these people are despising me. You can be honest and tell God, God, I hate this person. It's okay to say that. God already knows. It's not like you're throwing them off. You can tell, I can't stand this person. I wish bad things would happen to them. It's like about 20 years ago or so, there was this country song, and I don't remember all the words to it, but it's about this woman breaks up with the guy, because it's a country song, so obviously somebody breaks up. But she breaks up with him, and he says, you know what, I'm not mad at you, I'm gonna pray for you. And then the chorus says, I pray your brakes go out when you're going down a hill. I pray a flower pot falls from a windowsill, and then it goes on and hits you in the head, and and he says, yes, I'll pray for you. You know what? That's an honest prayer. If it's an honest prayer, it's okay to tell God your honest prayers. God, I really want something bad to happen to them. Just so you know, God is smart enough that he's not gonna do that, okay? It's not like, but if I pray that, maybe he'll do it. No, he knows, okay? He's God. But you can be honest with God with your prayers. And then he says, after he prays this, I love this verse 9. And we pray to our God, and, that's a huge and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. We prayed, and then we set up a guard to take care of the people because of this resistance, because this opposition from Sanballat and Tobiah. We don't know what they're gonna do, so we prayed and set up a guard. If you're taking notes, write down, prayer is not a substitute for obedience. Prayer is not a substitute for obedience. You have to pray and. You don't just say, well, I'm gonna pray and then I don't have to do anything, I'm good. Now, there are some things, there isn't anything you can do and all you can do is pray. But most things you have to pray and then do. You need to pray and go into action. You don't pray and then just hope God takes care of the mission. No, you pray and then you keep going in the mission. You keep working to carry out the mission. Nehemiah makes sure everyone is prepared to meet resistance. Here's what he says in verse 17 and 18. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. They got a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. They prayed and they were prepared. Prayer is only the first step in the action plan. Now, understand, it is the first step in the action plan, always. But it's the first step. There's more to it. All right, let's catch up to what's happening with the wall. Verses 6 through 8. So we built the wall. All the wall was joined together to half its height. So the wall is built all the way around, halfway up. For the people had a mind to work. They had this good attitude. They're ready to go. They put everything into it. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, now they've got backup, heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. Have you ever dealt with a bully? When bullies don't get their way, they get angry. And then it says, and they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. So they built the wall halfway up. The bullies get angry because it's actually working. So they make a plan to fight, and then it says to cause confusion in it. Resistance often comes as confusion. We're going to fight, and we're going to cause confusion within their group. I think that the most subtle tool of the enemy is confusion. If Satan can confuse us, then he knows that we will defeat ourselves. And in your mission, as you carry out the mission of God, you are going to face opposition, and it's going to come in the form of judgment, and it's going to come in the form of confusion. Because if we're confused, we're going to be off mission. So Satan loves confusion, because while you're trying to sort that out, you're not carrying out the mission. All right, now look what happens. Verse 10, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is falling. Now Judah is the city that is basically the county that Jerusalem is in. And all through Judah, they're saying the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. Now, if you remember, this is very similar, almost exactly the things that Sanballat and Tobiah said to mock them and ridicule them. They said, there's too much rubble. They said, you can't do this by yourselves. They said, you're feeble, you don't have the strength to do it. Now the people, the Jews who are building the wall, have halfway up. Now they are buying into what Sanballat and Tobiah were saying. See, Sanballat and Tobiah couldn't stop the work, so their best chance was to discourage the people, and it worked. Resistance often comes as discouragement. As we carry out the mission, the resistance that we often face is discouragement. Confusion is Satan's most subtle tool, but I think his best tool, his best weapon against the mission of the church is discouragement. See, resistance has a way of wearing you down. If you're running into the wind long enough, you'll be tired before it's time, before you normally would be tired. Resistance wears you down. The constant judgment and the confusion has led them to become discouraged. And the constant judgment and the confusion may have led you in here this morning, and you find yourself being discouraged. The more you listen to the lies of the enemy, the harder it is to resist them. And they begin to believe the lies of the enemy. And maybe you know what I'm talking about, because maybe you walked in here today, or maybe you're listening to this and you have been believing the lies of the enemy, and you've been resisting, and now you're saying, maybe he's right. And you're starting to get discouraged. The wall that you're building is halfway there, but you're starting now to get discouraged, and you don't know if you can actually finish it. The workers are getting tired. They're saying there's too much rubble, we can't do this. I want you to write this down. I want to explain it to you. Satan can't stop God's work, but you can. Now, that doesn't mean you have some awesome power where you can stop the mission of God. What I mean is, Satan knows he can't stop the mission of God, but you can stop participating in the mission of God. Satan's not going to stop it, but you can quit. You can get to the point where you're so discouraged that you quit, that you don't want to do it anymore, and then Satan wins. He's not going to be able to stop the mission, but he can get you to stop carrying out the mission. Maybe you've become discouraged in the mission, and you're thinking about maybe just giving up on it. Let other people do it. Let other people carry out the mission. Surely God's got other people who can do this. God has given the mission to us for a reason. Why? Because we need to carry it out in order for the mission to happen. Satan can't stop it, so he wants to just discourage you. So if you're feeling like that, what do we do? See, Nehemiah gives us some clues into how we can deal with resistance. He says this in verse 14, I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, these people who are discouraged, these people have been judged and are in confusion, and they're discouraged, and they're thinking about maybe giving up. They don't know if they can do this anymore. He says, do not be afraid of them. Yeah. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. See, we have to keep pushing into the resistance. In other words, we have to resist the resistance. The resistance isn't going to stop. Satan's not going to decide one day, you know what, I'll just let God's mission go forward. I'm not that worried about it. No, he's going to keep bringing the resistance. Nehemiah tells him, don't be afraid. And how is it that we're not afraid? Because we will remember how great and awesome God is. That's how we'll not be afraid. And he says, do it for your family, do it for your friends, do it for your sons and your daughters and your husbands and your wives. We have to face resistance together. That's how we deal with resistance. We face it together, because if one person is discouraged, it's easy for Satan to get the victory over them. But if a bunch of us come together and those who are really discouraged get encouraged by those who aren't discouraged, then we start bringing other people back and we're all one, and it's tougher to beat us. It's tougher to keep us off the mission if we are together. One person discouraged is easy to defeat, but a bunch of people coming together, encouraging each other, doing the mission together, saying, come on, if you can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. That will keep us going. That will help us face the resistance. That's how we deal with it. We do it together. And he says, don't fear, but remember how awesome your God is. Praise and worship is an antidote to fear. And when we do it together, there's something powerful about all of us coming together and all of us lifting our hands and all of us singing and all of us worshiping God and remembering how awesome our God is. And although we feel discouraged, we walk in and we hold hands with each other and we sing and we lift up our voices and we pray to our God and we remember just how awesome he is. Then we start to remember the things he's done for us in the past. And then we start to remember the things he's done for those other people in the past, because we're together with them and they're telling us what he's done for them and we're telling them what he's done for us. And we realize, oh yeah, we forgot, but now we're remembering how great and awesome God is. And we start to feel the discouragement dissipate as we gather together and pray together and talk together and worship together. It starts to fade. We gather together and collectively remember our God and how awesome he is. And that's why some of us who've been through some stuff, some of us who've seen what God can do, some of us who've remember how awesome he is, some of us who've been discouraged and we've come out on the other side of it because other people have encouraged us. Some of us, and can only speak of myself, we get into these worship services and we start remembering all that God's done, and then we start jumping up and down, and then my back starts hurting, and then I start thinking, oh man, I got to stand up there for 30 minutes, and I'm going to have to lay on the heating pad when I get home. But I'm remembering how he's encouraged me, and I just want to let other people know this is our God, this is who he is, this is what he's done. In Psalm 56, David said, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? So we have to face this together. If the battle isn't against flesh and blood, then you don't need to be afraid of flesh and blood. What are you worried about? What are you fearing that person for? The battle's not against them. Satan's just using them. They probably don't even know it. And then Nehemiah says this, in the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. Now, this is a cool verse. Why is this a cool verse? Not just because it says our God will fight for us, but it's the verse is leading up to it. What he's saying is there's people scattered all over Jerusalem. All over the wall, they're working, they're building. And so he says, if trouble comes, I'm going to blow the trumpet, and wherever you are, wherever you're working, you come to the sound of the trumpet and we'll gather together to face the resistance. But what he doesn't say is, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, come to where this trumpet is, we'll all get together and we'll fight against them. No, he says, when you hear the trumpet, everybody come together, everybody gather up, let's all get together, and then God will fight for us. That's not what he's supposed to say. He's supposed to say, hear the sound of the trumpet, come together, and we'll all fight. No, hear the sound of the trumpet, come together, let God fight. Let God fight the battle. That's how we deal with resistance. We let him fight it. The battle isn't yours, it's the Lord's. 2 Chronicles 20:15, do not be afraid and do not be dismayed, or you could put in there discouraged, at this great horde, this great group of people, or this great amount of resistance. For the battle is not yours, but God's. If the battle was yours, we are all screwed. The battle isn't yours, it's the Lord's. See, if you think it's your battle, you're going to get discouraged. How are you supposed to fight against all this resistance? How are you supposed to fight against Satan and the powers? You're not. You're supposed to gather together when the trumpet sounds, like we're doing right now, and let God fight the battle. So what do they do while God fights the battle? They worship him. God has won the war against resistance. He already took care of it. God's gonna fight for you. If it's not a battle against flesh and blood, then we need to let God fight the battle. Because he's not flesh and blood, we are. Jesus used the resistance. Now, when you run, obviously, I've had a lot of experience with running, as you can tell. Why are you laughing, Ross? But when you're running or you're cycling or something, or even just doing weights, resistance is how you can use resistance to become more, to gain more strength. You can use resistance. It's actually called resistance training. And every person who is on the mission of God is in resistance training. You're going to face resistance, but Jesus showed how to use resistance against itself so you can be stronger. Hebrews 2. Since therefore, whenever you see therefore, you got to find out what it's there for. Since therefore, and it's talking about the children share in flesh and blood. Since the children share in flesh and blood, that means humans, us, right? The children, who's the children? The children of God are humans. Therefore, he, Jesus, likewise partook of the same things. What things? Flesh and blood. This is another way of saying Jesus became human because his kids were human. That through death, hang on to that phrase, that is so important. Through death, he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. See, Jesus faced resistance. He faced the ultimate resistance, which is death. And it says that he overcame the power of death and the one who has it, the devil. How? Through death. He used resistance to defeat resistance. See, Jesus is the smartest person. He's not just God. He's the smartest human being that ever lived. He was God and man, and as man, he was the smartest one. He used resistance against itself. He used death against itself. Satan said, I'm going to put the ultimate resistance against him, death. And he's going to die, and he's going to be tortured, and he's going to hang on a cross, and he's going to be beaten and bruised. We're going to put nails in his hands. We're going to put nails in his feet. We're going to put this crown of thorns in his head. We're going to rip out parts of his beard. They're going to spit on him. We're going to punch him. We're going to beat him. Well, at least flesh and blood was going to do all that with Satan as the force behind it. And we're going to defeat him. And Jesus said, bring it on. And as the resistance came, he used it to get stronger. And he went inside of death. And through death, being inside of death, he came out on the other end and defeated death by going through it. So Jesus went through resistance, came out on the other end and said, I am now the God of resistance. And you're still going to face it and you're still going to see those things. But God has worked through that, literally through it to overcome it. And that's why we praise him, and that's why we serve him, and that's why we put our focus on him, and together we let him fight the battle because he already did it. And the last way we deal with resistance is draft with Jesus. Now, I've asked for a little bit of help with this one. So Angie, my lovely wife, is going to come up and assist. And in this illustration, Angie is going to be the part of Jesus because that is far more accurate than me being the part of Jesus. There's a thing in cycling. It's a technique they use because you're going to face this resistance, right? When you're cycling and all this wind is coming on you, all this resistance. So they call it drafting, right? How drafting works is you have the person who's in the lead. Now you have to pretend like you're cycling. No, not really. Just kidding. Okay, so you have the person in the lead who's the lead cycler, right? And then people line up and they'll get behind the lead cycler. The lead cycler is taking most of the resistance. They're facing the resistance and they're parting it And yes, some of it still hits you. You're still going to have some resistance. But if you're right behind that person in the front, you're going to be able to go faster. And that's what we need to do with Jesus, because Jesus faced the ultimate resistance, death. So we get in line behind Jesus and we say, okay, you've taken the resistance. You're going to keep taking the brunt of the resistance. I'm going to get in line behind you. I'm still going to have some resistance, but if I'm following you, the resistance is going to be nothing like it was, and I know that I can overcome it because nothing's going to defeat you. So if you're in charge, if you're in the lead, I know we got this. But what we do is we start to draft with Jesus, and they're like, I got this. Resistance isn't that tough. And then we come out here, and before we know it, we find ourselves flat on our behind because we can't do this without him. And you have to get in line behind Jesus. You have to draft with Jesus because he makes it easier. His burden is lighter than what you're facing because he's faced that resistance. And if you're here this morning and you're listening to this and you've never bowed your knee to Jesus, if you've never given him your allegiance, if you've never said, I'm getting behind you because I want to put all my faith and trust in you, then I'm begging you, yes, begging you to do that today. To come and be saved and be baptized and say as a symbol to everybody, I'm drafting with Jesus. That's what baptism is. It's saying to everybody else, I've decided to get in line behind Jesus and draft with him as we deal with this resistance because he's gonna lead us through it. And when we're drafting with Jesus, it makes things so much better. Get in line behind Jesus and stay there. Draft with Jesus. Thanks, babe. Good job. You're out here flailing around with all this resistance. You need to get together. We need to face it together. And that means you need to get in line with the rest of us behind Jesus and stay there. And here's how you know if you're not staying there. Because you start facing a whole lot more resistance and you're not able to handle it. When you're trying to fight it yourself, if you try to fight resistance yourself, you're just gonna fall. But with a team and Jesus in front, we can face whatever resistance the enemy throws at us. Let's stand together. God, we thank you for defeating death by death, through death. We thank you that you have taken the brunt of that resistance so we can just get in line and draft behind you. Yeah, we still face resistance. It's still gonna come, sometimes heavier than other times. But when we're behind you, we know it's okay because you are battling the source of the resistance, which isn't flesh and blood, but the evil one. We're gonna go into our communion time. If you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, I wanna encourage you to take communion with us together as we face this resistance. The elements are at each of the doors. So if you'd like to take part in that, you can. What we're gonna do is we're gonna give you a couple of minutes to we'll let the music play. But here's what I want you to focus on. Because the children were flesh and blood, he became flesh and blood. And the elements that you hold for communion is a symbol of his flesh and his blood. His body that was broken for you. His blood that was spilled out for you. Take time to celebrate. Take time to rejoice. Take time to lament. Take time to pray and think about he did this. And it says so that his people would no longer have the fear of death and no longer would have no longer be lifelong slaves. See, we're bound in chains with the evil one. Jesus took on those chains and busted right through. And that's what we celebrate when we think about his blood and his body hanging on the cross, as we remember that we are no longer slaves. We are free. Take some time for communion, and then we will close in a song.